Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim. Join hosts Dan Melnick and Qasim Masood as they explore big ideas, limitless possibilities, and engage with visionaries, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who dare to dream big, get inspired, motivated, and find practical tips for personal growth. Think big, dream bigger, and ignite your potential.
Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim, and our guest today is Dan Rosenberg. So Dan, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, tell us where you live and what you do.
Sure. So I live in London, North London in the UK, even though my business is US based, predominantly LA. And I'm currently co-founder of a company called Material Venture Studio, where we co-found brands with celebrities and creators.
Awesome. So how did you get the idea to actually go and start this business?
So this has pretty much been 10 plus years of real life work experience culminating in this new venture. To give a kind of brief history, I joined a startup in the UK called Prizeo in 2012. That was all around democratizing charity fundraising. So typically you'd have kind of auctions where you'd have really big celebrity prizes, but ultimately the charity got no exposure, and the charity was limited to what one person was willing to bid for the prize. So this business kind of flipped that model on its head and thought, right, what if we kind of leverage the talent social media audience? You obviously get a lot of exposure for the charity. And even if you make it $1 or £1 to enter a sweepstakes, you could actually raise a lot more than what you could in an auction. So I thought it was a really interesting business. I had come off the back of two mobile-based startups in the UK that both failed, but there were lots of good learnings from them. So I wanted to carry on the entrepreneurial journey. So I joined then in 2012, and then we got onto Y Combinator 2013. Raised some money, flipped the company to a US business, and we were working with A-list talent. So One Direction, Kobe Bryant, Justin Bieber, Jennifer Lopez, Paul McCartney, some really great talent. And we raised tens of millions of dollars for various charities. But it was a really lumpy business. And one of our key learnings was that over time, we'd started introducing physical reward. So for example, if you donated $1 or $5, you'd get your entries. If you donated $50, you'd also get a t-shirt. And we actually ended up kind of creating our own bespoke merchandise with the celebrity and the charity. And those contribution levels became the most popular. So it was kind of a light bulb moment where we thought, actually, maybe there's something here in the merchandise space, which could either be tied to charitable fundraising or for profit. So in late 2014, we actually co-founded another company called Represent.com. And for about 6 months, we were running both Prizeo and Represent, which was, in hindsight, a rather crazy experience. We were kind of all over the place. But both were still operating, and Represent took off really quickly. And Represent was kind of twofold. One side was a completely self-serve platform where anyone could go on, create and sell their own merchandise without having to buy inventory, so effectively risk-free. And the other side was more of an agency type business where we would leverage our own technology, but go to our entertainment relationships and go to people like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Leo DiCaprio, and say, hey, we can power merchandise for you. All you really need to do is tell your fans about it. We'll do everything on the back end. So design, sampling, set up the e-com store, production, fulfillment, customer support, etc. And that business took off really, really quickly. Within the first 6 months, we got to about $1 million in top line revenue. So we thought, let's focus on this business. Even though Prizeo had been a success, we ended up selling Prizeo in 2015 to a US entrepreneur that had a bunch of kind of for-profit charitable businesses. So it found a nice home, and it still exists today, which is great. And then Represent continued to grow and thrive. And then kind of mid 2015, late 2015, we went out to market to do a Series A. And through one of the funds we were talking to, we ended up getting acquired by a large custom e-commerce company called Custom Inc. So that was a great deal for the team, the investors, and then fast forward a few years post-integration and growth, we then kind of engineered a sale from Custom Inc. to Cameo in October 2021. They'd had a stellar 2020, as did we. And it really felt like we could build an entertainment behemoth together. And Custom Ink were kind of willing to let us go because we weren't really a kind of core part of their overall business. But they were a great home and we really appreciated our time there. So we moved over to Cameo. We had a really strong first quarter. And then kind of stuck around for the next year. And then really through all the learnings from the journey, what we were doing, where we saw the market going, we kind of thought, or me and my partners in my new business thought, actually, the one thing that we've kind of missed to date is upside potential and equity ownership in the kind of product brands we're creating for talent. And given what we'd seen in the creator economy and obviously a number of success stories, number of unicorns, but even smaller companies doing tremendously well that creators are either investing in, co-founding, being the CEO of, we thought actually all of our experience and relationships with the entertainment space, this seems like the next model. So I ended up leaving Cameo Represent in March of 2023. Took a few months to kind of rest and recover and spend time with the family. And then kind of late summer started the new business, Material Venture Studio.
Awesome. So in terms of Material Venture Studio, I guess like, can you just explain for our audience, like how is it different? Like, what exactly does that do compared to like what you did before?
So the previous business was really like an agency. So it was a rev share business model. We would do all of the back end, like I mentioned before. Our talent partners ultimately needed to promote the message to their fan base. So Material is similar in the sense that we're responsible for all of the operational elements of the business. There's a couple of key differences. One is that Represent was very much merchandise. So that was typically apparel. We did some other products, but it was mainly kind of typical merch you'd see out in the market. With Material, we're kind of category and product agnostic. So and I can't disclose too much because we haven't launched any of our brands yet, but we're looking at kind of food and beverage, electronics, lots of different categories. And really it's about products that make sense for the talent we're working with. And there's a very authentic story for them to tell their audience. And then the other difference, like I mentioned previously as well, is the equity. So effectively, these are all new businesses. So Material effectively co-founds joint ventures with the talent we're partnering with. They have an equity ownership. Material has an equity ownership. So really, we're kind of, the aim here is to build a portfolio of brands over the next few years.
Awesome. So it's still sort of like a partnership with these influencers or famous people, and you're starting brands on their behalf and helping them grow.
Exactly. And I think another kind of big difference is with the Represent business model. We're very much a service provider and we built really good relationships. But a lot of the time it was, hey, let's do a drop or a campaign and then move on to the next one. We had lots of retention from the talent we worked with, but it was kind of more, that was the type of model. Whereas with Material, and this is kind of transcends into the sales cycle and the time it takes to pitch an opportunity, do the product development, get everything right and ready for launch. But this is really about finding creators that want to be entrepreneurial and B, building products that are going to resonate, and we're building for the long term. So it's not, hey, here's some t-shirt designs, do you like them? Bit of feedback, chop and change it, go to market. Right, that's great, did really well. This is kind of brand building. So it's very different in that perspective.
For sure. So I feel like many creators today already have their own brand. So is it kind of like if they already have that, would that be a good fit? Or is it really just the creators that don't have anything yet and aren't selling anything on their current social media channels?
I think it really depends. So most creators have merch of some sort right now, but that doesn't mean that there isn't room for them to launch a snack brand or something else, as we've clearly seen with lots of creators that had their kind of t-shirt, hoodie merch and are now entering lots of different spaces. So it really is kind of opportunity dependent. I think the real key thing with what we're doing here is you can't just slap a famous person's name or face on a product and expect it to be successful. The product needs to have a lot of thought go into it. There needs to be a reason why they're doing it. And there needs to be a reason why their audience would want to buy it from them.
Makes sense. So obviously that you mentioned earlier that you're in the UK and you work as a US company. So I'm curious, like obviously like the US is a much larger market, but do you have any traction or any thought of like working in Europe, or I guess like what does that look like for you?
Yeah, so from a sales perspective, everything we do ultimately has an international focus. And especially when you're talking about A-list talent, whether that's traditional actors or musicians or digital creators like YouTubers and Twitch streamers, their audience is global. So we need to service that audience. The reality is the US is obviously the biggest consumer market. And for what we're doing, the majority of the talent we want to partner with are based there. And again, just through the last 10 plus years through Represent, Cameo, and all of that experience, most of our relationships and connections are kind of US based. So yeah, I have to work the topsy-turvy hours, but I'm used to it now.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like with Europe, and I always talk to people over there, it's like a big challenge. Obviously, being in the UK, it's one thing, but in Europe, it's like a lot of these countries have their own languages and currencies. It can make things much trickier. In the US, we all speak English. It's the US dollar, so it makes things much more streamlined.
I think things have evolved quite fast in the e-com landscape, and there are so many tools now which help with automated translation, currency conversion, sales tax equivalent in Europe. So it's definitely a factor. I think it's got a lot easier over time. So it's less challenging today than it was 5, 10 years ago. But yeah, again, I think just what we're doing, the reality is we can have big businesses if it's only in the US, where that's unlikely to be the case in individual European markets.
Makes sense. So when you're going to launch like a certain brand for one of your clients, or for one of these celebrities, like what is the way they're going to go and promote this? Is it really going to be all through organic channels? Are you planning on running ads? Like what does that look like for you?
Yeah, so it's kind of, again, one of the key learnings from Represent and our experience there. I think the genius of that business was we were generating millions of hits to our website and store pages on a daily basis. And although we spent some money on advertising, really we didn't in terms of significant spend, and it was really about leveraging the talent's organic channels, whether that was email lists they had, their social channels primarily. And over time a lot of our business came from YouTube and Twitch streamers who obviously have inbuilt distribution. They're regularly putting out content. So the strategy here is to supplement that with some retargeting and standard marketing, but to be honest, the kind of foray into the market when we launch a brand is very much reliant on the talent's promotion. And that's one of the things we need to be really comfortable and confident with when we're partnering with someone. Are they really going to get behind this? Because it's not going to work. It's not going to be a sustainable long-term business if they say, yeah, I'll do one tweet, maybe I'll do an Insta post one day and that's it. They really need to kind of be so behind the product that it's natural for them to talk about it all the time.
Yeah, that makes sense. So obviously during COVID, it was very challenging for in-person meetups, things like that. But now that we're all past that, like, are you planning on or have you done in-person events with some of these celebrities to go and promote their products? Or I guess like, what does that look like for your business?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things to that. Most of what we're doing, whether it's day one or slightly longer term, we intend on our brands to be in retail. We see everything as omni-channel these days. Obviously, D2C had its day. That's kind of changed. I think it's a little bit different in the creator space where you're not having to spend fortune on Facebook to drive a conversion. But yeah, we definitely see all of our brands being in retail at some point in its life cycle. The other kind of element to it is very kind of dependent on the talent and the product and the opportunity overall. So for example, our first brand launching later this year is a product that lends itself to a certain type of retail environment, and not necessarily at launch, but at some point we plan to do signings or similar types of in-person experiences, which A, drive hype, B, will convert into sales, and kind of the standard things there.
That's awesome. So I guess you've seen a good amount of value in conversions from these events, from appearances, autograph signings, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the really cool stuff we did under Represent included a signed element as well. So naturally, that kind of plays into the collectors space, which is very different, but is really interesting in a growing market. I'm sure you know about all of the kind of trading cards and these types of things. So that's definitely something we're very aware of and will play into for the right opportunities.
Awesome. So, what would you say is currently like your biggest priority because you're launching these brands through the end of this year, early next year?
Yeah, so I think it's the balance of wanting more and wanting it faster in terms of pipeline and brand launches. Like I alluded to earlier, these things take a lot of time from engaging with the talent initially. If there's interest, there's lots of follow-up steps that involves us investing in branding work, product development, sampling, so on and so forth. So these things take a lot of time. So I think one of the challenges since we launched this has been adjusting to that pace versus Represent, which was really fast paced. There was always a new client or multiple clients we were working on at the same time. But I think the balance here is we raised a small round to get the business up and running and hire the first kind of team members. But the reality is I can see us being stretched quite quickly. So it's important that we only kind of work on the number of opportunities we're confident and handling operationally. The intent is to scale, but I think it's going to be very strategic as to how and when we do that.
Makes sense. So, what would you say is the one biggest piece of advice that you wish you knew before you started any of these companies?
I mean, it's probably a bit cliche, but as I alluded to again at the beginning, I've kind of been on an entrepreneurial journey since day one. Proud to say I've never had a real job, which isn't for everyone. But I think the biggest learning is ultimately you don't learn unless you do. And typically you don't learn a lot unless you fail. So I think it's about not being scared of making mistakes. Try not to make them twice. That's not a good thing. But I've kind of learned everything I have kind of on the job. So yeah, I think it's about going out there. And I think today is a really interesting environment where people can have day jobs, 9 to 5s, but side hustles. Obviously, AI is changing the landscape as well. But I think it's really about kind of, if you've got an idea, you can think about it for 5 years, or you can think about it for 5 minutes and then go and try something, test an assumption, build a prototype, whatever it is. So it's really about kind of getting out there and learning as you go.
100%. So, if we're going to have this conversation again in 1 year from now, where do you see things going for your business?
I mean, I'd love to say we've got at least 10 brands live. They're all doing millions in revenue. The reality is right now, kind of by end of next year, our target's to have 3 to 5 brands live. And I think that will take a lot of time and effort to do that successfully. So yeah, I'd say 3 to 5 brands in the market, all humming along nicely would be very great.
Awesome. So, if somebody watching this wanted to reach out to you, do you mind sharing your social media, website, I guess, best ways to get in contact?
Sure. Email me anytime at dan@materialgroup.co. No M on the end. That's important. And you can find me on LinkedIn as well, Daniel Rosenberg. I'm sure there's many of them as well, but I'm sure you'll find me through the content I've shared today.
Awesome. Well, Dan, thanks so much for your time today.
No, really enjoyed it. Thank you too.